So my name is Carson Lee Olson, and I'm here today with, if you just want to say your name for the record.
Hi, this is Bill Cervone.
And we're here today with the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program. And although we're both in Gainesville, we're going to be meeting over Zoom today. And the date is October 27th, 2020. And this interview will be part of the Catholic Institutions of North Central Florida project. So thank you again for taking time to speak with me. I wanted to start by just asking if you're from Gainesville or what brought you to Gainesville?
Well, I grew up in Tampa, and I came to Gainesville in 1967 to go to the University of Florida. And after I graduated both undergrad and law school from there, I ended up staying and have been here ever since.
And did you spend K through 12 in Tampa?
Yes, I was actually born in St. Pete, but my family moved over to Tampa when I was a toddler. So all elementary and high school education was in Tampa, and then it was straight to Gainesville for the University of Florida. Your sound is gone.
Okay, can you still hear me?
Yes, now that's good.
I'm so sorry about that. But yes, I was just asking if your parents were from Florida.
No, both of my parents were actually born in Pittsburgh, and they moved to Florida probably the mid 1940s into the St. Pete area. My dad's parents also moved down at the time, and they kind of came with them.
And what was your childhood like in Tampa?
Well, I guess the only way to describe it is perfectly ordinary. I come from a large family of 7. I have 6 sisters. We obviously we were Catholic and raised in the church, and I went to Catholic elementary and high school. It was, in all respects, a normal and loving and happy family environment.
And what are some of your earliest memories of church or of going to church or anything?
Oh gosh, I can remember in my elementary school years that we would eventually be allowed, my sisters and I, to ride our bikes to go to Mass if we wanted to go to a different service. I can remember sitting up front, and I remember when I was old enough to be allowed to be an altar server, doing that in my elementary school years, and being involved in other church activities of that sort. We moved to Miami briefly in about 1962 or 63, but we were really only there for less than a year, so didn't really get involved in the church, the parish that we belonged to there. When we moved back to Tampa, to the same house, actually, it was right back to normal. And I remember nuns were the backbone of the elementary school at the time, as opposed to now where that doesn't seem to be so. And of course, nuns back then were in full habits and all of those kinds of things. I remember vividly the pastor was a kind older, he probably was not as old as I remember him, but a kind older man from Ireland who was just kind of like a grandfather figure to us. It was a very comfortable environment in that church, in that parish.
And what church was that? Do you remember?
Sure, it was Christ the King. It's one of the older, bigger parishes in Tampa now. The church has been renovated several times. They've expanded their building and their footprint a lot. I don't go there very often anymore, but I had a wonderful experience a few years ago where a friend of mine here in Gainesville, her daughter got married in that church. And it was just so cool to be able to go to that wedding in the church that I grew up in after having been gone for so many years.
And you mentioned you went to Catholic elementary school. Which schools did you go to?
Christ the King had an elementary school, which was, I guess they might have had kindergarten, but back in those days, kindergarten was not the thing it is now. So it was certainly 1 through 8. And then after that, 9 through 12 was Tampa Catholic High School, which was at the time very new. I was in the third graduating class, so we were a fairly small school. I think there were 63 in my graduating class in 1967, and the school had barely been open when I started going there in my freshman year.
Oh, wow. And do you remember, was there a particular order of nuns that worked at your elementary school, or?
You know, it's hard for me to really remember. They might have been Notre Dame. I'm not sure. And I'm trying to think of the order from my high school, where, of course, I was much more involved personally with a couple of the nuns at the high school. We had a faculty of certainly not a majority of religious, but some priests, quite a few nuns, and then quite a few lay folks there. The high school in the order was the Dominicans.
And then, how did you get involved in St. Patrick's again?
Well, when I first moved to Gainesville, of course, like so many other folks here, you're on campus. Back in those days, freshmen were required to live on campus, and you had no car or anything of that sort. So St. Augustine's, the church right across from campus, was where you went to church. And that's where my years as a student, where I went. Even after I had graduated and started working, that was still my church of preference, just because I had become established in that parish, I guess, even though I was no longer living on campus. There comes a point in time, certainly in your later undergraduate years, and for me, I went on to law school. After you get into law school, you're not living on campus anymore. Regardless of where I was living, it was in the student type areas. So St. Augustine's was the church I went to. In about 1976 or 77, I bought a house that is coincidentally only a few blocks from St. Patrick's. And even after I moved into what would definitely be the St. Patrick's parish boundaries, I still largely went to St. Augustine's because it was where I was accustomed to going. Eventually, the fact that St. Pat's was only a couple of blocks away won out, and I would start going there more frequently than not, and eventually it's become my parish home for decades now.
Oh, wow. And does your family attend St. Patrick's with you?
Well, I'm single, so no. The answer to that is no. The only family that have gone, when I have family visiting, they'll go with me to there most times, although sometimes they'll leave on Saturday evening or early enough Sunday to get back to St. Pete for their own church.
And you mentioned that you're one of 7 kids. Do your sisters still attend church regularly too?
Well, unfortunately, not all of them do. Some do to different parishes in St. Pete. Others do not.
And I wanted to ask you about during your student years, which priests were serving at St. Augustine, or St. Augustine, I'm sorry.
I guess it is St. Augustine. That's kind of interesting in that one of the pastors there was Bernard McFadden, he's no longer a priest. He left the priesthood and got married in maybe I could be wrong, 80s. But that was ironic in that he was one of the teachers at Tampa Catholic when I was there. He was one of my high school teachers for several different subjects, English, religion classes, things of that sort. And then a couple of years after I got here, he showed up at St. Augustine's, and I would see him in that same kind of role, although not nearly as frequently as in high school, where we had daily contact with classes. And that reestablished facilitated more a personal friendship with him that's continued over the years. I don't see or talk to him often. It's been a couple of years, frankly. He lives in one of the small towns not too far from here now. But that's kind of ironic that he became one of the parish priests at St. Augustine's at the same time that I was going to school here and started attending there.
That's so interesting. And I also wanted to ask if you would maybe share a little bit about your professional life and what you do for a living.
Well, currently I'm the elected state attorney for this judicial circuit, which covers 6 counties. And that's a position I've held since the late 2020, late 2000. And I'll be leaving office and retiring at the end of this calendar year. In addition to the 20 years I've spent as the elected state attorney, I've worked in that office most of my entire professional career since 1973 when I graduated from law school. I did spend a couple of years in private practice here in Gainesville in the late 80s, early 90s, but primarily I've been a prosecuting attorney here.
And what was your experience at UF?
You know, I don't know how to, it kind of gets compartmentalized into several different areas, I guess. It was a huge culture shock to come from a small place like Tampa Catholic, where we had a couple of hundred students total. Like I said, I think 63 in my graduating class, to the University of Florida, which at the time only had 18,000 students, as opposed to what it has now, something approaching 50. Even 18,000 was an overwhelming experience. I came up here. There were a couple of other kids from my high school class who also came up here, but I remember my dad dropping me off at the dorm and being on my own, and it was just kind of overwhelming to try to find a way to fit into such a big, different environment. You have the whole roommate thing with a total stranger, and all the strangers in the dorm that you get used to. I knew very few people, and maybe that was one of the comforting things about St. Augustine's at the time. It was at least you could consider the church parish a kind of a community, even though I was not involved in parish activities and didn't really know any of the other people, but it was still a commonality between us. After you go through your first couple of years, you get over that culture shock, you get over the figuring out what it means to be both, not just to have the freedom of being here as a student, but also to have the responsibility of being a student. And your studies become more important to you than, let's just say social activities and things of that sort that can take over when you first get up here. By the time I graduated and went to law school, it was very clearly, the path was set towards what are you going to do for the rest of your life, and how are you going to get ready to do that? So the university became a true educational experience more than a social and educational experience when you're an entering freshman.
And when you were an undergraduate student, did you feel like there were a lot of other Catholic students at UF? I know historically the university's been very Protestant dominated.
No, I couldn't say that I felt that there was any real thriving Catholic presence. I did not go out of my way to seek it. And like I said, I wasn't involved in parish activities at St. Augustine's, but other than going to church at St. Augustine's, no, there was no real vibrant Catholic presence, not even things that I think I see now with Catholic Gators and outreach programs. Maybe they were there and I simply was unaware of them. You tend to be oblivious when you're 18 or 20 years old.
And then I also wanted to ask you, how has your faith influenced your professional life, if at all?
That's an interesting question, and there are a multitude of answers to that. I think that it is impossible for anybody who lives a faith-based life not to try to incorporate those tenets into the way they conduct themselves, whatever their career happens to be, whether it's a professional career, whether it's the life of a housewife like my mother was, things of that sort. You live the tenets that you believe in your faith. For me, it's a little bit peculiar in that there is such a stark contrast or dividing line between state and between church. And I have a sworn obligation as the elected state attorney to uphold the laws of the state. And I must segregate that from matters of conscience to me. But that seldom becomes a real problem. For the most part, what I am able to do is try to make the judgments and decisions we make that affect people's lives, whether it's victims or defendants or anybody that we come into contact with, under the tenets of the church as to how people should be treated with fairness and equality, and try to make right-based decisions.
And working in the judicial system, was your Catholicism ever challenged or brought attention to, or?
I guess the answer to that is yes, in a very limited context. The church has very distinct views on capital punishment, for example. The law of Florida has contrary laws in some regards, and I am infrequently but occasionally put into the difficult position of having a constitutional obligation to my job in terms of what the law requires concerning prosecutions of that sort and what my faith personal beliefs are. I've had there was a nun who I would interact with occasionally who was very aware of my position, and she was very involved in death row ministries and things of that sort. We would occasionally talk, or if not talk, she would occasionally just kind of give me that look, like, watch your conscience, watch your faith. That's been the primary area of difficulty for me in maintaining the segregation that I must between professional obligation and personal belief. The other area that is not so much in play because the law really doesn't impact it. Abortion is, of course, a common issue. Fortunately, in all my years, we have never had to confront any sort of criminal case involving abortion. And I have very, very strong feelings on that, and it would be very complicated for me to have to deal with that on a regular basis. I know how regular it is in the community. It's not like the death penalty, which is something that comes up infrequently under any set of circumstances. Abortion is unfortunately a fact of life day to day, but it's not one that comes into play in our office. The rest of the things that we deal with are really quite compatible with church teaching and with going back to biblical times and the Ten Commandments. Thou shalt not steal is the same thing as a Florida statute that says it's grand theft to steal.
I also wanted to ask you, in your career, since you are about to retire, what have you been most proud of, or what accomplishment has meant the most to you?
Well, I think what's been most meaningful to me is the number of people who will come back to us years later and say thanks for something that we helped them through. And people may not understand that, but that includes not just people who have been victimized, who you would think prosecutors deal with. And I have developed relationships with folks who have been victimized in the most horrible of ways. And I've just been so impressed with so many folks who are able to go forward with their lives despite the horrible things that happen in their lives to them or to family members. Having those kind of relationships with people has been meaningful. Equally meaningful to me has been the occasional defendant who we have given a break to, frankly, and who has used that break to make something of their life and who comes back to us later. I remember vividly a young man who had been in trouble for some fairly serious things. Maybe some people would say should have gone to prison. We crafted a resolution other than that because we thought he had the potential to make something of himself. And several years later, he came back to the office in full military uniform just to say, thank you. I want you to see what I've made of my life because you gave me the opportunity. And that to me is a huge plus when we are able to have that kind of impact. In public service life, you don't always get anything remotely approaching gratitude. or appreciation from most of the people you deal with. You get all kinds of hostility, and I understand that people who are coming to my office are not happy that they are there. Something bad's happened. They've been victimized. They've been dragged into a situation they don't want to be dragged into. But when we can have a positive impact on somebody's life and make their life better despite whatever bad circumstance got me involved with them, that's a huge positive to me.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm so sorry to circle all the way back, but you had mentioned that your mother was a stay-at-home mom, and I had forgotten to ask what your parents did.
She was a housewife in ways that was the norm in the 50s and 60s. And of course, there were 7 of us, so being a housewife was a full-time, all-consuming job. My dad was, when I was a kid, he was the credit manager for a department store chain. It doesn't even exist anymore, but a major department store chain in the Tampa Bay area. And in later years, he got out of that and had his own credit agency that he worked in until he retired.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much. Sorry, Lori. And then going back to St. Patrick's, I did want to ask, I didn't get, or I might not have just written it down. You said you started attending St. Patrick's about when?
I bought my house in 76 or 77, and I would have sporadically started going to St. Patrick's, although for the first couple of years I was in the house, I probably went to St. Augustine's more often than not. I would say that certainly by the mid 80s, St. Patrick's was my parish home. You get to a certain age where the college environment over at St. Augustine's doesn't quite fit as well anymore. Plus the sheer convenience of St. Pat's. I could walk if I wanted to. I don't. I guess I'm too lazy. It's like a 2-minute drive, though.
And I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about any of the history of St. Patrick's you might know.
Well, I don't know much. I know by other older parishioners who have told me, or just things I picked up. I know about the original building that was located closer to downtown. I never knew that building or anything of that sort. I know only the existing physical plant, both in terms of the current church that we have been in for 10 or 12 years now, and more than that, the church building that is now a social hall, but was the church itself for all the years since I started going there in the early 80s. I have a little memory of the pastor who was there when I first started going there. His name was Monsignor Burns. I'm sure you have his background and involvement in all that. I have very little memory of him other than that he was the pastor. My memory there really begins with Father Julian, who we were blessed to have as the pastor for so long, which is not the way things are anymore. I think most pastors are moved around by the diocese and far, far quicker than all the years that he spent with us there. And then there was the continuing series of associates who would come in and out over the years, some of whom I remember, and there are probably others of whom I don't remember at all.
And over the years, what programs or oops, sorry, I lost my question. But what programs or church kind of events have you been involved in, or?
In terms of formal involvement, I was the first thing I think probably was that I somehow got put on the parish council way back in I'm guessing this had to be the late 80s or early 90s. It's so long ago, I'm not even sure what it was, and I'm not even sure that happened. It was just kind of one of those. Father Julian said, "Would you mind doing this?" And in my upbringing, when the pastor says, "Would you mind?" that means you're going to. So of course I did, and I spent a couple of years on the parish council back then. More recently than that, but not too terribly out of whack time-wise, I was asked to become an offertory counter. I've been doing that for decades, seems like. And then again, more recently, when Father Lawrence came in as the current pastor. I've ended up back on the council when we reformed it after he was appointed to the parish. They do so many different social activities that I will occasionally be able to go to, but to be honest with you, my work responsibilities keep me from doing a lot of those kinds of things right now. But they, of course, unfortunately, right now with the pandemic situation, we can't do it. But in normal times, there are always all sorts of gatherings, whether they are strictly social or whether they are focused on in some sort of a religious theme, retreat kind of thing. So occasionally those kinds of things, and I'm certainly aware of them. And it's ironic. I guess this happens in any church or any sort of organization. People tend to sit in the same place every week, and they tend to become more comfortable with or more friendly with people that sit around them. And over all these years, I've developed those kinds of friendships. It's almost, this probably isn't a great thing. Maybe some of it is, maybe some of it isn't. I usually will go to the 5:30 Saturday evening mass, or what's 5 o'clock now, but the Saturday evening or the early Sunday morning mass, and rarely go to the 11 o'clock mass. So I will look at people from the 11 o'clock mass who might say, oh yeah, I can go to St. Pat's. And I'll look at them with a blank stare and say, I've never laid my eyes on you. I don't know you. As opposed to the folks who I see every week at the masses that I usually attend. That's, to me, one of the strong points about the parish, and maybe because of our size being relatively small, that I think we do develop personal relationships with each other over time, and do try to go out of our way to know what's happening in each other's lives, and to be available to each other if necessary, or if there's any problem that we can help with.
And you did mention the mass you usually go to, and I was going to ask, what do you like, or what are your favorite aspects about worship at St. Patrick's? Is it maybe?
You know, it's just a comfortable setting for me. I have, when I travel, you go to so many different parishes or churches across the country or even across the world. Some of them have been very outgoing and welcoming to strangers who happen to be there passing through town. I assume they do that every week. Others, it's so big that even that just, you just don't get that feel. For example, one of my I have family out in Denver, and have gone to the cathedral in downtown Denver there, which is just a magnificently beautiful church, but it's big. And you're not there but for one, maybe 2 Sundays in a row, and then maybe see you next year. You don't have any sense of connection other than to the liturgy itself, not to the people. With St. Pat's, I do have that feeling of connection. You know, I look for people. I see people. I wonder why so and so's not there. Do I need to check with them? Is there a problem? Or I know they're out of town. See you next week. Those kinds of things. The fact that Father Julian was with us for so very long allowed us to facilitate that kind of family feel between him and not just the people like me who might have some limited assignment like the council or being an offertory counter, with everybody. I mean, I remember him when I first started going out of his way to say, remind me what your name was, who are you? And I saw him over the years doing that with so many people who would be new to the parish, maybe had moved in, or maybe were just visiting and were never going to be back again. But he facilitated that kind of feeling like, I'm not just some guy standing up on the altar for an hour for Mass. I truly am a part of, and want you to be a part of, the community that we have here. And that's different to me, I think. I'm sure other churches have the same thing. I don't go to them often enough. I rarely go to any of the other parishes in Gainesville anymore. There was a time when I would go to Holy Faith fairly often because of scheduling issues, but I rarely do anymore. when I do, I don't have that same sense of connection to the pastor and to the worship family that I do at St. Pat's.
And what was serving on the council like? What did that entail?
Oh, that was an interesting experience. Sometimes you can't help but feel that you are there to ratify what the pastor wants, and there was always a sense of a disconnect. It's not quite the right word, but there was a strange tug of war with are we here to give input, or are we here to simply say yes to what you want? And when those times were, when it was that way, it was not, I didn't think, a very productive experience for me. Now, my current experience is 180 degrees away from that. Our parish council now is very involved, and the pastor goes out of his way to make us involved, or to bring us into being involved. And even when he announces something to the parish as this is what's going to happen, he goes out of his way to say, the parish council and I have discussed this and have decided that we would like to proceed in this fashion. And usually he goes beyond that and says, but before we do it, I and they want you, the parishioners, to give us some input. Do you like it? Do you not like it? What suggestions or changes do you have for it? So that's a much more productive environment for our current parish council than might otherwise sometimes be the case.
And you mentioned that the council was reformed under Father Julian. Is that something that happens commonly?
Well, I can't tell you exactly how this happened. There's a set term that you should be on it. You should always have new people coming in and out for a lot of reasons. So my time was up, and I was no longer on it. Somehow, the council just kind of went away. Is my sense. It wasn't in existence. And there were a couple of difficult years for us when Father Julian had retired, and we did not have a permanent pastor. We had two priests who were assigned to us, neither of whom stayed very long for whatever those reasons were. They weren't really there long enough to get something formed to the way they wanted to do it. There just was no parish council at all. Towards the end of that time, Father Phillips from over at Holy Faith, prior to his passing, was kind of assigned when we literally did not have anybody there, and he was assigned to run the parish. And in anticipation of us having a full-time priest reassigned to us, he started us having a working group of putting things together so that we would be able to talk to the new pastor whenever he was appointed and say, here's what we do here and the things that you should be aware of, or decide how you want to do, and all that kind of stuff. And that kind of evolved into the current parish council after Father Lawrence was appointed.
Thank you so much. And I was going to ask you, what do you think Gainesville's perception of St. Patrick's is, and has that changed over the years?
I don't know that the community has much of a perception of St. Patrick's. We are, in some ways, an older inner city kind of parish. We are not the parish where all the young folks live, out to the west of the city, where most of the young professionals, the people with young families. Our neighborhood is older. We have certainly some young membership because of the school being located there. But I don't know that the community has much of a concept of St. Pat's as being the original Catholic church in our community from a time when Gainesville was a very small town. I think that the town is obsessed with everything from the University West, where all the population growth has been, all the business development has been, all the new residential homes are. And those of us who live on the east side of town, like I do, kind of feel like the east side is almost sometimes a stepchild. I don't say that in reference to St. Pat's exclusively. I mean that more globally. It's kind of, you go to the east side of Main Street and we're an afterthought, and I'm afraid that the community, other than maybe the religious community that's aware of different churches, different denominations, doesn't have much of a concept of St. Pat's.
And I was going to ask you, over the years attending St. Patrick's, have you seen any large changes in the church itself? You mentioned that there were kind of some changes when Father Julian left and Father Lawrence came. Were there any other large changes?
Well, the building of the new church was a monumental time for us. I know that there was great concern about the economics of building a new church, the financial viability of a parish that, as I was saying, tends to be on the older side, and is physically located in a part of town where the population growth is not going to be the same as it is on the east side of town. The new church, I know that some people probably don't care for its architecture. I didn't at first. I've grown to like it. It now has an open, spacious feel to me, certainly in contrast to what's now our parish hall. It's a much nicer worship environment for me than it ever used to be. But I know some people think it's stark or industrial or something of that sort. I guess you're always going to have that. Traditionalists and modern folks in terms of the design of a church. But that was a formative experience for us, the process of Father Julian marshaling all that and all the financing and everything that was involved towards getting that done for a parish of limited financial means, and actually pulling it off. What that has enabled us to do, economics permitting, and we're still in the process of it, is develop different parts of the campus or the footprint for the parish for different purposes. Like eventually, that old church building will become a much more functional parish hall than it is now. The presence of the school also, it gives us a lot of pluses that other parishes our size might not have. The presence of all the kids can be very vibrant for us older folks, and the facilities that we have there to accommodate an elementary middle school population is also different than what I think our normal parish population would support.
And I was going to ask you, the Catholic Church as a whole has, or what have been some of the Catholic Church's crises as a whole in the past decades, and how have you responded to them?
Well, the one that immediately comes to mind is the sex abuse scandal. That has, I've had to deal with that professionally as well as personally, and I know from talking to many Catholics from many places around the world, the different opinions, the different reactions to that. Some people are so disgusted with the whole thing that it causes them to lose their faith, which I think is a terrible, terrible consequence and really shouldn't be. I think the foibles of men should not destroy your belief in your reliance on God. So I really hate to see that has had such a terrible bad effect on Catholicism and Catholics in general. The broader social turn to a more secular life is very bothersome to me. The fact that our country has gone from a founding principle of separation of church and state, which makes perfect sense to me, to almost a premise where nothing can be have any sort of religious basis, which is not at all the way the country was founded. It is just very disturbing to me and does not bode well for the future of the country. And I don't know what we can do about that other than that those of us who do have a faith need to be mindful that the two go hand in hand. It's no different than the parable we heard at, I guess it was last Sunday's, or Sunday before his gospel, about render to Caesar what is Caesar's and God what is God's. Those trends in contemporary culture are very bothersome for me. And I think in St. Pat's that we managed to get by that for I don't know what reason, but we managed to get by that in that I have not seen it have a deleterious effect on our congregation. We seem to be stable size-wise. We don't grow much, but we also aren't losing people who say, this isn't for me anymore, or having people who go off saying, well, I'm religious, but I can define my own religion, whatever it happens to be. I think you need the structure of the church setting.
And I know in recent years there's been a lot of, I think Pew Research Center even has some data on, the country becoming more, or people identifying less as religious. I was wondering what your reaction to that would be.
I think it's illustrative of how many people think that they don't need any sort of spiritual or moral compass in their life. I think the phrase that Pew and others use is nones, N-O-N-E-S, that there's a growing number of people who profess being religious, but their affiliation is none, or they have some global concept about a nebulous, undefined spirit. It's almost like the Star Wars, the Force is with you kind of stuff. I just think that is such a mistake. To me, the church is there for the purpose of bringing structure to your faith and to your belief. And as Catholics, we have a very set standard according to dogma and tradition that other Christian denominations do not have. For somebody to say, I can pick and choose what I want among that is disingenuous at best. Religion is a personal thing, yes, but I also think that it needs to have a structured setting to help you direct your personal beliefs and to bring them to where you need to be to get to where you want to be after death.
And what is the place, in your opinion, maybe of the church and also of St. Patrick's moving forward in a very modern world?
I think the place for the church and the place for St. Patrick's in particular is to maintain itself as a center of stability with the reality of our tradition, our dogma, our beliefs, where people can always come and can always feel comfortable and can always have the reassurance given back to them about, hey, you're not alone out there in the world with whatever problems or issues you might be facing. In the good times, in the bad times, we are always here for you as the center where you can express your religious feelings without somebody sneering at you, where you can express your religious concerns or doubts and talk to the pastor about them and work through those kinds of issues. To go back to the sex abuse scandals, many people I know have had to work through how could this happen. It's not any different than the more global concept of how can a good and loving God allow evil in the world. I think the church provides the one stable, reliable place in the community where you can come, and St. Pat's very effectively is that place for me, and I believe for virtually all of our parishioners.
And you mentioned having that space to come and freely express religious beliefs. Do you think that in the community, is there space for Catholics to do that elsewhere, or?
There certainly is. It might be difficult for some of us some of the time. I am not one that by personal disposition and or because of my professional responsibilities is going to wear on my sleeve something that says I am Catholic. But I'll tell you that I think most people who know me know that I am religious and that I am a person of faith. And probably most of them understand that I'm Catholic, not because I proselytize on a daily basis, but because I try to live my life according to the way the church instructs me to live it. Too many people in our society are losing that. It's all about me and what feels good to me right now. I guess maybe I see a skewed population as a prosecutor. I'm seeing people who have gotten themselves into trouble because they did not have the discipline to avoid I want this now, whatever it happens to be, and however I'm going to get it. But I think that's a huge problem in our society, that folks who think they can solve without having some sort of structured system like St. Pat's can't do it.
And what are your hopes for the future of St. Patrick's?
Well, I would like to see the church become a more vibrant presence on the east side of town. The way Gainesville is set up and structured, we are never going to compete with the big parishes out to the west of us for population, for the young folks. I think our role can be very much defined on our part of town and the population that we have over here. That may entail more services being made available to people who are getting into their retirement years and things of that sort. We do have the blessing of the school that brings a younger congregation in. I know many folks will come to Mass at St. Pat's, even though technically they live in one of the other parishes, because their kid goes to school there. And I think that's a good thing too. I think that we need to be very concerned about the economics of the current situation. I guess people might say I'm frugal. I think St. Pat's is always going to have to be a parish that is aware of the limited financial assets that we bring in and how we can best utilize them to not just have nice things like we want, like a big fancy new church building. It's not new anymore, but it was. But also be able to allocate our resources for the support of the needs of the community on the east side of Gainesville, where we are situated.
And do you think do you think St. Patrick's being a downtown church will be a part of, or is it a part of its identity, or do you see that becoming a part of its identity in the future? Because you mentioned maybe that east side of town.
To the Catholic community, I suspect that we are identified as the downtown parish, even though to me, I mean, it's only a mile or two from classic downtown, but we're not downtown in that sense. It's not like going to St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City, for example. But I think we do have a unique identity as the original parish in the community and as the parish that services everything for this half of the county. I don't know how many people drive in from Waldo and Hawthorne, even though they have St. Philip Neri, and Hawthorne people may come to Gainesville. The Waldo people, I don't know, they might go to Stark, they might go to Keystone, I don't know. But folks I know people from Micanopy come to St. Pat's. I think that can be our identity, and we just need to be aware that we can't give ourselves airs about we're going to be the best parish numbers wise. We're going to engage in the best thing ever. We do very successful outreach things, like we've had a couple of free dental clinic things over the last couple of years that you may have learned about. Fabulous events that bring in I don't know, hundreds of people who need desperately that kind of dental care and got it through the good offices of our church. And that's a function of our parishioners, not necessarily the church or the church building, but our parishioners. And that's the kind of people we have. We can make that kind of outreach available to the folks on our side of town without worrying about, and I don't mean this in a negative way at all, without worrying about the the bigger, broader, huge, spectacular things that maybe a parish like Queen of Peace can do.
And then I just wanted to end by asking you, what does being Catholic mean to you?
Being Catholic forms the essence of who and what I am. I know nothing else. I am blessed to have been born into a Catholic family and raised Catholic. I consider myself blessed to have gotten through the years so many of us do, where we start to wander away from our faith, and I got through that and am back and happy about it. I cannot envision not being Catholic and not having Catholicism as the basis of everything I do. It's the reality of my professional decisions having to sometimes be in conflict with that. I will be very glad when that is done, when I am retired. I'm not allowed to have personal opinions in a lot of the professional things that I do, but my personal beliefs and opinions, they are formed by the Catholic Church and the Catholic faith more than the Catholic Church itself. Like I said earlier, I think a church building, a church structure, everything we have from St. Peter's in Rome all the way down, that's great. That helps us direct our energies. But the faith itself is to me different than the church facility itself. And the faith is what guides my life.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to do this. I'm just going to stop the recording.